Good evening. Welcome to the Tyngsborough Special Annual Town Meeting. In the absence of the elected town moderator, it becomes necessary for the town meeting to elect a temporary town moderator. So I'll take nominations.
Nominate Bill Gramer.
Second that.
Bill Graham is nominated and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Congratulations.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm going to swear in Bill as the temporary town moderator. Do you, Bill Graham, solemnly swear that you will faithfully and impartially perform the duties imposed upon you as a temporary town moderator for the town of Tyngsborough to the best of your knowledge and ability, so help you God?
I do.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to a special and annual town meeting for May 7th, 2024. It is 7:13. And before we begin, I'd invite you to join me in reciting our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And at this time, I'd like to invite our chairman of the Select Board, Eric Eldridge, to come to the podium.
Good evening. Kind of a bittersweet day. As many of you know, the position of town clerk is an elected one. Serving a term of 3 years, the town clerk is a chief record-keeping and elections official for the town. The town clerk is also responsible for conducting all elections, maintaining the voter rolls, producing and recording minutes from town meeting, maintaining vital records, issuing marriage license and business certificates, maintaining cemetery records, and so much more. Since 2003, Tyngsborough has been fortunate enough to have Joanne Schifris serving as our town clerk. Joanne is no stranger to public service here in Tyngsborough. A longtime resident, Joanne has served on various boards, including Zoning Board of Appeals, Finance Committee, Town Hall Feasibility Committee, Town Hall Building Committee, and the Bicentennial Committee, which planned Tyngsborough's 200th anniversary celebration. Joanne is also a regular volunteer at the annual Festival of Trees and the annual Block Party. Joanne's professional career in Tyngsborough started in 2002 when she was hired as the assistant town clerk. Upon her hiring, the town clerk at that time told her that due to the cyclical nature of the work, it takes 10 years to learn every aspect of that job. Not even a few months later, the town clerk notified Joanne that she would not be seeking re-election and that Joanne should run. Joanne jokes that this concerned her because she had less than a year on the job and was just told that it took 10 years to learn everything. Needless to say, Joanne hit the ground running and demonstrated a tremendous amount of knowledge, skill, and motivation. Joanne knows where all the bodies are buried, literally, and can tell you exactly when town meeting approves certain things. She has developed a tremendous ability to rattle off the address of any given person based simply on their name and has built great relationships across the town. Joanne is not seeking re-election this year and has instead chosen to enjoy a well-earned retirement. She leaves big shoes to fill, but we are grateful for her service, not just in the last 21 years as town clerk, but for all of her service in the various roles she has held. In honor of her dedication to the town of Tyngsborough, I am pleased to present this plaque in recognition of her service on behalf of the Select Board and a very grateful town. I'm sorry I had to do it. You know, we
Thank you all. It's been an adventure. It's been a ride. It's time for somebody else to drive the bus. I just want to thank you all for your support and kindness over the years, and I certainly hope that you will provide that same level of support and kindness to my successor. Thank you.
Congratulations, Joanne. I understand this is your 44th town meeting.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Okay, before we get started on the articles, a couple of housekeeping items. Tonight we're scheduled for both special town meeting as well as annual town meeting. We have 2 articles under the special town meeting warrant and 26 articles under our annual town meeting. You can follow along with all of the articles in the town meeting guidebook, which was available in the back of the room. It contains the full text of every article being voted on tonight, as well as the votes for approval or disapproval by the Select Board and the Finance Committee. There's also a QR code on the back table if you want to pull it up on your smartphone. After each article is read, I'll ask for a motion to approve, and if there's a second, that motion will be on the table for discussion. For most articles, a member of our Select Board will give a brief explanation, and then we'll open it up for discussion. There's a few articles where we'll have a presentation, including our budget, Article 6. Our town manager will be making a presentation. If you'd like to ask a question, make a comment, please come right on up to the microphone. And as usual in our town, we ask that you limit your comments to 5 minutes. Once discussion's over, we'll call for a voice vote. Most articles require only a simple majority. If not, I'll point that out. If the vote's close to call, you all should have a colored piece of paper that was given when you checked in, and we may call for a visual count or a hand count if the voice vote's too close to call. So keep that piece of paper handy. And then lastly, we do have some non-residents here tonight who may speak on certain articles. And in order to allow them to speak as non-residents, I need a motion to approve that the following individuals are permitted to speak during town meeting as follows: Colin Loisel, Town Manager; Catherine Foster, Assistant Town Manager; Attorney Kate Federoff, Town Council; Town Engineer Jacob Zwicker; Richard Howe, Police Chief; David Andrus, Finance Director and Town Accountant; Eric Salerno, Town Planner and Economic Development Director; Ronnie Camille, Media Director; Michael Asciola, Northern Middlesex Council of Governments; and Douglas DeShanes, Attorney representing the citizens petition at Article 20. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
A second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 1 for our special town meeting. To see if the town will vote to transfer from free cash the following sums of money for the following purposes, or take any other action relative thereto: $264,322 to the fiscal year 24 school department revenue, and $190,696 to the fiscal year 24 school department revenue. Do I have a motion on Article 1?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 1 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Is there a second?
Mr. Moderator, I second that.
Motion and a second. Any explanation?
Funding turned back from departments in prior fiscal year's returns to the undesignated fund balance, referred to as free cash. This funding requires a new town meeting vote to authorize a new use of the funds in a following fiscal year. This article covers $264,322 that was intended to be transferred at the May 2023 annual town meeting warrant, but couldn't because free cash wasn't certified. Free cash was certified on April 19th, 2024, and so this article addresses last year's contribution and our annual contribution amounting to $190,696.
Thank you for that explanation. Any discussion on Article 1? Seeing none, all those in favor of Article 1 as printed signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 2, Sewer Enterprise Fund retained earnings transfer to see if the town will vote to transfer the sum of $1,025,170 from the Sewer Enterprise Fund retained earnings to the Sewer Enterprise Fund for fiscal year '24 to be expended by the Sewer Commission as shown on Article 11 of the May 2nd, 2023 annual town meeting, or take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 2?
Yes, Mr. Moderator. I move that the town vote to approve Article 2 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Is there a
Second.
Motion and a second. Any explanation?
Yes, Mr. Moderator. Article 11 of the May 2023 annual town meeting warrant set the Sewer Enterprise Fund budget for 2024, or FY 2024, apologies. This article included a transfer of $1,025,170 from the Sewer Enterprise Fund retained earnings to their budget. This article was pulled because the Enterprise Fund retained earnings were held back when free cash was not certified in May of 2023.
Thank you. Any discussion on Article 2 for a special town meeting? Hearing none. All those in favor of Article 2 as printed signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That does carry unanimously. That concludes our special town meeting portion. I have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. That carries. On to our annual town meeting warrant. Article 1, reports of the town officers and committees to see if the town will vote to accept the reports of the town officers and committees as printed or take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 1?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 1 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any explanation?
This article approves the annual town report, which is available at www.tyngsboroughma.gov and in hard copy at the annual town meeting, Tyngsborough Public Library and Town Hall.
Any discussion on Article 1? Seeing none, all those in favor of Article 1 as printed signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries unanimously. Article 2, to see if the town will vote to transfer the sum of $960,000 from the following sources to the following stabilization funds for the purposes hereinafter specified. $400,000 from capital asset stabilization, $350,000 from special ed stabilization fund, $200,000 from the debt stabilization fund, and $10,000 from the stormwater stabilization fund for the purposes as printed in the town meeting guidebook or take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 2?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 2 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any explanation?
Mr. Moderator, this article places funding into the accounts described above for future capital asset and stormwater improvement projects. This article reflects deposits that were intended to be made in May of 2023 but couldn't be made because free cash was not certified. That includes $200,000 to capital asset stabilization and $100,000 to special ed stabilization. Those amounts are represented in the above table on top of the contribution planned for FY '25.
Thank you for that. Any discussion on Article 2?
Good evening, Billy Crawford, 83 Frost Road. One of the items, debt stabilization, I do not believe was unfunded in 2023, but that's okay. What I'm concerned about is the relationship of debt stabilization, $200,000 from free cash, and its relationship to Article 6, believe it or not, because Article 6 contains $1.23 million of school interest debt payment, okay, that we have to make in November. If you remember the marketing campaign that resulted in the middle school. So we got $2.6 million in free cash. We added hours to town to the town labor force, salaries and all that. $300,000 of free cash is going to go to sidewalk at Norris Road. Well, those are all great things, but the Board of Selectmen decided to vote not to help the citizens with $1.23 million. Their share was about a third that we were obligated to. I still have the flyer from 2022 at a meeting just like this, where it says they were going to pay $1 million toward the 3.1 million. But they decided somehow it benefits us by the town not meeting their share. So I would ask, why aren't they paying their share that they obligated to us 2 years ago right here in this building?
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Any response from the board?
I can take this one, and I don't know whether this is related to this article or Article 6.
Well, it gets to this one because it was a motion I'm going to be making about the debt stabilization.
Okay, so the reason for the debt stabilization is, and I'm sure Mr. Crawford's well aware, that the $200,000 for capital debt stabilization is not just for school. It is for long-term and short-term debt stabilization. What we're trying to do is actually get that debt stabilization account, which is at zero, increasing over the next several years, and you'll see it in Articles 16, 17, and 18, so that we have long-term ways in which we can address the debt needs of the town now that ARPA money we've exhausted all the ARPA money, and so the $200,000 is needed in the coming years. When we get into Article 6 and talk about the $1.2 million, what you'll see is that we're actually trying to smooth that. Last year, there was money in the debt exclusion fund for interest, just like it is this year. It was a much smaller amount, but it was in there last year, and so we're very consistent with how we're dealing with that. And what you're going to see when we do some of the models is that we're trying not to just address fiscal year 25, but address 26 and 27 when the full debt impact comes on.
Okay, sir, I hear you, but I was promised that the town would participate when I began paying toward that middle school. There was none of the razzle-dazzle, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that, and it's $75. And there was none of that. There was no discussion. I have it right here in front of me, the marketing campaign that went on. Okay, so what I'm hearing, I hear what you're saying about debt stabilization. I asked the question at the pre-town meeting. I was there. I asked the question about that. And the town is trying to find ways to pay its $1 million share, which is going to probably begin in 2026. I get that. But this is 2025. Where is my money? There was an obligation to pay about a third. So if this board doesn't want to do that, Mr. Moderator, I'm going to make a motion.
Go ahead.
I make a motion to amend Article 2 by striking $960,000 and then inserting $1,260,000.
Can you repeat the numbers?
I amend a motion, Article 2, by striking $960,000 and then inserting $1,260,000.
Well, so that's the total, Mr. Crawford, but then it's broken down into 40
I understand that. I was going to do that in my next motion. I'm doing one piece at a time.
Well, why don't you do it all together? So that
Okay, I'd be happy to do that. Okay, can I give my explanation first?
Well, why don't you make your motion? and then
Okay,
if
that's
there's
my
a second,
motion.
you can do
Okay,
the
my next
explanation.
motion is, I also make a motion on Article 2 by striking $200,000 from the debt stabilization line and then inserting $500,000.
Hold on. Okay, so you've added the 300,000 just to the debt stabilization line item. The other three line items are staying the same?
Correct.
For your motion?
Yes, sir.
So
Okay.
then from 200, it becomes 500?
Becomes
That's correct. Now, my explanation is, there
Well,
was,
hold on. So I have a motion on the floor to amend the total sum referenced in Article 2 from 960,000 to 1,260,000, an additional 300,000. And that 300,000 additional would be allocated solely to the debt stabilization fund. Do I have a second on that motion? Motion and a second. Explanation.
there was $2.1 million of free cash is being allocated in this fiscal year 25 budget. The town just got $2.6 million, $2.6 million, okay, of free cash certified. Okay, there's $500,000 of free cash that still remains not allocated. Okay, the marketing campaign that resulted in the new middle school promised that the town would pay a portion of the debt. The select board voted not to keep that commitment for the November 2024 interest payment. Therefore, this motion and the motion in the next article would instruct the town to pay its agreed upon share.
So I'm going to ask for some assistance of our select board and possibly the finance committee. But my understanding is that this article simply funds the debt stabilization fund. It doesn't have anything to do with how that's spent.
That
So
Article 3 does.
Okay. We're not there yet.
Nope.
Okay. So, Mr. Town Manager or Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I would like to have the town manager and council weigh in on this one, just because it does impact what we're doing on some of the long-term borrowing and some of the other items. So could you opine on that?
Yeah, the only point that I would make on increasing the free cash amount, Mr. Crawford is correct. The Department of Revenue certified roughly $2.6 million in free cash. The warrant articles in front of you this evening allocate roughly $2.1 million of that. In prior town meetings, the town hasn't fully expended all of its free cash, and that's allowed us to maintain a AA+ bond rating, which we talk a little bit about in the Article 6 presentation. The reason that's important is because in November when we do, and we're kind of straying away from this article, but Mr. Crawford brought this up, in November when we do the permanent borrowing, which is that 30-year borrowing for which the Finance Committee and Select Board committed $1 million annually, we'll have to renew our bond rating with Standard & Poor. And one of a couple of things that they look at is your excess levy capacity, which our Article 6 presentation covers, that we have some this year. They also look at how over-leveraged your free cash is, and one of the things, as a policy matter, that not just this board, other boards and the Finance Committee have recommended in the past, is to not use as much free cash as possible, because that favorably impacts the bond rating, whereas a reduction in our AA+ bond rating could result in interest rates increasing, and even a 0.5% increase on a $52 or $54 million 30-year borrowing would end up costing more than the $300,000 that is on the table this evening. But certainly there is $300,000 available in free cash. It'd be I think the town's past policy practice has been to leave as much unexpended as possible, because that also helps absorb future fiscal year challenges. All of our neighboring communities are looking at overrides. Tyngsborough is fortunate we're not. And in all of those communities, one of the things that is a tied factor is that their free cash was overexpended, or they're now relying on free cash to balance the operating budget. So that's the only note I'd make on free cash, but I can confirm that $2.6 million was certified, and this article appropriates 2.1.
I'm going to recognize
Mr. Moderator, as Colin said, what we tried to do this year was to make sure that we can get the best bond rating that we can get, and to get the best interest rate that we can get. Just so everybody knows, as Colin said, if our interest rate is increased by 0.5%, that means it's going to cost every taxpayer here another $75. I mean, depending on the valuation of your home, can go up or down. That's $75 a year. So our goal was to have a fiscally responsible budget. when this middle school thing first got proposed, as Mr. Crawford said, I'm the one that made the proposal. It's a 30-year bond, and we're going to spend $1 million, out of the operating budget over 30 years, $30 million. That's what I proposed. And as Mr. Crawford has said, we mention that every time we talk about the budget in our meetings. We still feel we can do that in future years. Thank you.
All right, well, my rebuttal is we made choices to spend $2.1 million, but the choice was not to meet your commitment that you made to the residents of Tyngsborough. Okay, so you made other choices with your free cash other than doing what you said you were going to do. Okay, we got $300,000 for a sidewalk at Norris Road. That's fine, but you made the choice to do things like that instead of doing what you said you were going to do. So the very first time you were supposed to meet your obligation, you're not doing it. The very first time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Crawford. I do have a concern whether changing that dollar amount impacts the scope of the warrant as it was posted. So if there's a change in Article 2, I'd like to hear from the board. How does that impact the other articles in the budget as well?
Yeah, so, and let me also clarify. The commitment from the board was $1 million per year once the long-term borrowing started, and that is exactly what it was, and that is what it still is.
Not true.
For 30 years, Mr. Moderator, for 30 years, we made that commitment, and it's not a percentage, it's $1 million. And we have indicated since day one that that was to start in fiscal '26 because we knew when the school was going to be done. And as we get into some of the future articles, I think this puts us in a more difficult position just because putting the money in debt stabilization, it can only be used for debt stabilization, the extra $300,000 versus free cash where we have options, where the town has options to address that.
Yeah, the town has options not to give us our money. That's what I just heard.
All right.
No matter what.
Anything further?
No, nope.
Okay. I'd like to have town council talk about whether your amendment is outside the scope of the posted warrant.
So naturally, I would defer to the moderator on a scope issue, but essentially, for those of you who aren't as familiar, scope is the thing that governs town meeting and governs amendments to motions. And the moderator decides whether or not the posted warrant has information sufficient to pull people and encourage people to come to town meeting. And if it's something, if an amendment is made that is so far outside what was posted in the warrant, it's considered out of scope and out of order, okay? And so echoing the chair of the board, I would say one of the things the moderator might consider is a person who would otherwise come if they knew, for example, their bond rating would be at risk by the motion that was made. It could be a reason to find that it's out of scope. And similarly, the restrictions on that money once it's placed in debt stabilization, because the chair is actually 100% right. Once it goes into debt stabilization, that's the only purpose it can be used for when you decide to expend the money. So whether or not that change is significant enough that people who otherwise said, you know what, I don't need to go to the Tyngsborough town meeting tonight because I feel comfortable with what was posted, they may have attended. So if, in the moderator's opinion, he feels like those changes are so significant that people who would have come, had they known this were going to be made, would have, then it would be out of order.
So, Mr. Crawford, you're proposing a change of $300,000, and I'm hearing from the select board that that impacts numerous items in the budget going forward. Bond rating and the use of those funds for other things, I think, are material to the warrant.
Well, I know
I'm
that's...
interested if the Finance Committee wants to weigh in as well, but you know, there are many opportunities for you and citizens to come to select board meetings, which you do attend, Finance Committee meetings, and this is debated, and we argue, and these are drafted and circulated and changed and massaged until they get to the point where they're posted. And, you know, I don't see town meeting as, you know, a second bite at the apple to try to make a material or significant change to a posted warrant article. That's an important procedural item that, you know, we adhere to strictly. So
I tried to handle this a different way and to no avail.
well, I'm sorry that, you know, your what you had wanted didn't come out the way you wanted it, but this is the posted warrant article. And a $300,000 change, not only within this article, but impacting other articles, I think is outside the scope of the warrant. So I'm not going to recognize your motion.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. All right, is there any further discussion on Article 2? Sir?
I know that you just said that you're not going to listen to that motion, but I just had a question on that regarding procedure and the rest of that. He was looking, sorry, John Murphy, 61 Ting Road. He was looking to add $300,000 to that 960, and I'm hearing that you can't do that because that was what was posted. The second part of that came to me is to what the funding for the school, which the town committed to, and the allocation of funding to that school. Is that then a future article? Would that be the Article 3 with the allocation of, and if we didn't add $300,000 to it, it would be just the 960 that's on the warrant in Article 2? Is that where that discussion would happen?
I'm not sure I follow your question. The $1.2 million payment that Mr. Crawford was talking about, I believe, is part of Article 6.
Yes, for clarification, Article 2, which we're discussing, simply deposits tonight these sums of money into the stabilization accounts.
Okay.
Article 3 doesn't actually include, Article 3 is the appropriation from stabilization.
Mm-hmm.
Article 3, as posted, doesn't actually include an appropriation from the debt stabilization account.
Okay.
It only includes 3 other ones, but the moderator's correct. The debt exclusion that was approved by town meeting and the ballot vote show up in Article 6.
Okay, so Article 6, if we were looking to have allocations made towards the school like the town promised a couple years ago, that would be the time to make those discussions? Because the town did agree to a third of the payments. It wasn't $1 million a year, it was 35%. And we weren't expecting to have any payments this year, but we had that $1.2 million, $1.24 million unanticipated payment that we're responsible for as the town this year for the residents, but the town is not contributing at all towards that, from my understanding. And that's the part that Billy had an issue with. That's the part that I have an issue with as well, is because part of passing the school was that the town was going to help contribute towards the payments that the residents were making towards the school.
The other thing I will say is that Article 6 deals with all the appropriations, which include the debt exclusion.
Okay.
So if there was a discussion on anything in the budget, that would be during Article 6, I guess is the short answer.
That's the time to have that discussion. I wanted to
To have the discussion, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion, Article 2?
Elma Riley, 18 Pawtucket Boulevard. I take exception to the fact that you say, because people sit at home that have read the articles, they don't come. We all got here. We all made the effort, knowing that articles get changed in a town meeting. So I think you actually have a nerve to say to us, we can't make an amendment because somebody stayed home.
Thank you. Any further discussion, Article 2? Hearing none. All those in favor of Article 2 as printed signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. That does carry. Article 3, to see if the town will vote to authorize the Select Board to expend up to the following amounts from the following stabilization funds for the following purposes, or take any other action relative thereto. $800,000 from the Road Stabilization Fund, $30,000 from the Stormwater Stabilization Fund, and $350,000 from the Special Education Stabilization Fund. Do I have a motion on Article 3?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 3 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any explanation for Article 3?
Mr. Moderator, this is an annual article that authorizes the town to expend a certain amount of money from stabilization funds during the year for the purposes described above.
Any discussion on Article 3? Hearing none, all those in favor of Article 3 as printed signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 4, to see if the town will vote to establish pursuant to the authority granted under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 53E and a half, fiscal year 25 spending limits for the following revolving funds to be expended in accordance with Article 44, Departmental Revolving Funds, Section 5, Table of Authorized Revolving Funds as printed in the Town Meeting Guidebook, or take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 4?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 4 as printed in the Finance Committee Guidebook.
Is there a second?
Second.
Explanation?
This article authorizes the annual expenditure limits for revolving funds shown above for certain town departments under Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53E and a half, for fiscal year beginning on July 1, 2024 and ending on June 30th, 2025.
Any discussion on Article 4? Seeing none, all those in favor of Article 4 as printed signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 5, to see if the town will vote to authorize the Select Board to enter into lease purchase agreements up to 5 years to lease or purchase equipment for the town, said contracts to be subject to annual appropriations or take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 5?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 5 as printed in the Finance Committee Guidebook.
Second.
Explanation?
Yes, Mr. Moderator. This article would authorize the Select Board to enter into lease purchase agreements for items including office equipment, vehicles, or other equipment. Massachusetts general law requires town meeting approval to enter into a contract in excess of 3 years.
Any discussion on Article 5? Hearing none, all those in favor of Article 5 as printed signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 6, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate and/or transfer from available funds such sums of money as may be necessary to fund town expenses for fiscal year 2025, or take any other action relative thereto. And the budget is attached as Exhibit A in the guidebook. The total budget for fiscal year 25 is $48,888,820.71. And our town manager is going to give us a presentation on this year's budget.
As the moderator indicated, the budget is attached to the Finance Committee Guidebook. This slide shows a summary. The fiscal year 2024 maximum levy capacity was $33,380,157, and in fiscal year 2025, which begins July 1st, it's $35,740,189. What makes up the levy limit is our prior year levy limit plus the Prop 2.5 increase, which in fiscal 25 is $819,728. We also are allowed to add in new growth. This year's new growth number is 50 grand less than last year's projection, and that's simply to match what we've actually been trending towards. And so that this year is 300,000. And all of this has to be justified to the state in November when the Board of Assessors does the tax rate recap. Adding to the maximum levy capacity is debt exclusions totaling $1.8 million. As mentioned earlier, that's $1.2 million for the middle school, and the balance is the remaining payments on the elementary school roof and a high school boiler project. Both of those are in their final year of repayment in fiscal year 2025. A breakdown of our budget is shown on this slide. Again, the final total is $48.8 million, which reflects our general fund operating budget, what funds the day-to-day of town hall, public safety, public works, and the school department. That total is $47.6 million, which is about a 3.1% increase over fiscal year 24's operating budget. We've already had a bit of a discussion on the middle school debt, but as has been mentioned, the Select Board, with the endorsement of the Finance Committee and the School Committee, endorsed a $30 million over 30 years contribution to the middle school debt to reduce the impact on taxpayers. To date, the town has done 2 short-term borrowings to fund the actual construction of the middle school. The first was a $7 million short-term borrowing in fiscal year '23, which matured this past November. When that matured, to continue construction, we did a second $30 million short-term borrowing. That will mature this coming November in calendar year 2024, at which point that $1.2 million in interest will come online. As was previously alluded to, last year's budget that was presented at this meeting included about $230,000 in interest. Certainly a $30 million borrowing has a much higher price tag on the interest. In November, as we anticipate the completion of the middle school project, we'll do our permanent borrowing. That's the 30-year borrowing for which the general fund is on the hook of that $1 million. You may remember from discussions that we were essentially earmarking the new growth from the Toll Brothers project on the former country club to cover that. It's about $1 million in new growth that we'd experience every year. It is important to note that because that project is not finished, we haven't yet experienced that $1 million in new growth, though we certainly expect to for fiscal '26. Over the last few months, we've been working with our borrowing agency, which represents municipalities, to ensure that the town obtained the best interest rates. Obviously, this is a tough market for interest rates, but our AA plus bond rating has helped us. Just a breakdown of what we expect the full impact of the debt exclusion to be. So this makes some assumptions, and obviously we always plan for a worst case scenario. Assuming a 5% interest rate and assuming a $52 million borrowing, you may remember that the town's share was slightly over $54 million. The middle school project still has more than $2 million in contingencies. The project is largely completely bid out at this point, so barring any unforeseen surprises, we don't expect to spend that full amount of contingency. Again, it's a 30-year duration, and one of the things that we were clear about was that the full impact, as described on this graph, wouldn't be experienced until fiscal year '26. And in order to accomplish that, we did a long coupon, which allows us to delay the first interest payment 1 year so that that full interest payment would come online in fiscal '26. Typically, with a 30-year borrowing, the first interest payment would come due 6 months after you issue the bond. In this case, that would be during fiscal year '25, which is what we were trying to avoid. So this chart shows the first 5 years of that 30-year loan. You can see that in year 1, and we'll talk about this in the next slide, because it's the first year, almost everything that you're paying is going to interest, and the total impact to the town before the $1 million contribution is $3.9 million. In subsequent years, it closes in on the 3.4, and that's where it stays consistently. This second chart shows what happens with the general fund contribution. So we're showing year 0, which is fiscal year '25. That's the $1.2 million interest payment. Fiscal year 1, which is in 2026, is the first full year of repayment on the 30-year note. You can see that it's $3.9 million total, with a $1 million contribution from the general fund. That brings the direct impact on the taxpayer down to $2.9 million. And again, in subsequent years, that settles at the 2.4 number. One of the things that we've done in setting ourselves up to get the best interest rate is leaving close to $350,000 in excess levy capacity. That's the amount of money that we could be spending based on our levy limit and revenue projections, but that is not proposed to be spent in this year's budget. For reference, last year's budget had less than $50,000 in excess levy capacity. We've also left close to $500,000 in free cash, and a previous article deposited $200,000 into debt stabilization, an account that can only be spent from with town meeting approval and can only be expended on debt service, whether it's short-term or long-term. And all of this, in our opinion and in the opinion of our borrowing agency, positions the town so that we're not over-leveraged and that we can expect better interest rates by maintaining our AA plus bond rating in November. In terms of the general fund budget, new items that were funded in fiscal year '25 is returning a part-time administrative support position to the fire department. That was instituted in the budget for the first time in fiscal year '23, but because the budget in fiscal '24 was much tighter, it was cut at the last minute. The fire department is obviously a large department. They're one of the only departments, certainly of their size, that doesn't have any administrative support. As has been the board's commitment over the course of the last 5 years, it includes a $50,000 increase in the general fund contribution to road maintenance projects. Again, in fiscal '24, the original budget proposal included that $50,000 increase, but to balance the budget, it was cut at the last minute. $10,000 to increase what is currently a part-time highway administrative assistant to a full-time administrative assistant position, and a $13,000 increase in our IT department to turn a part-time IT support specialist position into a full-time position. Of course, similar to our neighboring communities, we're facing other budget drivers as well. We're looking at a close to 5.7% increase in our trash and recycling contract, although we have been fortunate that we were able to get Republic down slightly below that, especially in year one. There are 2 line items that show up in here that look like a dramatic increase, but they're an accounting correction. Over the last 2 years, we've incorrectly budgeted the holiday pay in our fire department. Unlike a general government employee who on a holiday just doesn't go to work, there's no additional costs. On public safety side, they get paid for holidays because they run 24/7 even on holidays. We had not budgeted for that correctly, and so at the end of every fiscal year, we were asking the Finance Committee and the Select Board to make substantial transfers to cover the differences. This will simply correct that so that we're not asking for a year-end transfer. Not surprising, in our IT department budget, we've seen software costs increase. That represents about 35% of the increase on the IT budget. One of the things that we have done to mitigate that is we were able to leverage the contractual change on our largest software, which is Viewpoint. It's how you apply for building permits, health permits, etc. The contract changed, so they're charging a lot more, but we have unlimited records, and so that allowed us to eliminate contracts we had for other software vendors, thus bringing down what would have been a bigger increase. And then finally, to continue to support the police department's cruiser fleet, which is on the road 24/7, there is an additional first-year payment for a new cruiser lease in the fiscal year '25 budget. That is the presentation that I have.
Great. Thank you for that. Do I have a motion on Article 6?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 6 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on Article 6? And if you have a particular line item that you'd like to discuss, let me know. We can pull that out and vote on that separately. And once we pull out anything we're going to vote on separately, we'll vote on the rest of the budget first, get that out of the way, and then we turn to items that there may be a dispute about. Mr. Crawford.
Billy Crawford, 83 Crossroad.
It wasn't me, Mr. Crawford. It wasn't me.
This guy's coming over here. New coming.
Thank you. Billy Crawford, 83 Frost Road. I don't have a particular line item. I would just bring attention to what I said before. We have money for this, we have money for that, but we had no money to supplement $1.23 million for the citizens of Tyngsborough. We were all led to believe that when we voted on it. And I do have to point out stabilization funds. We have in your guidebook $5,323,638,000. In general stabilization fund, almost $3 million. So they could have stepped up and gave us what we deserved.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Article 6? Seeing none. All those in favor of Article 6 as printed in the town meeting guidebook signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 7, to see if the town will vote to fix the salary and compensation of elected officers of the town as provided by Section 108 of Chapter 41 of the Massachusetts General Laws as amended for the fiscal year 2025 as printed in town meeting guidebook, or take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 7?
Mr. Moderator, I move the town vote to approve Article 7 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Is there a second?
Second.
Explanation?
This article requests funding for the stipends of elected officials as presented above. Note that there are no changes in stipends, but that the salary of the town clerk was reduced as our longtime town clerk, Joanne Jeffries, did not seek reelection, and her successor will have less experience than she did.
Thank you for that. Any discussion on Article 7? Seeing none, all those in favor of Article 7 as printed signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 8, to see if the town will vote to transfer from free cash the following sums of money for the following purposes, or take any other action relative thereto, with the dollar amounts and funds identified as printed in the town meeting guidebook. Do I have a motion on Article 8?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 8 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Explanation.
Mr. Moderator, funding turned back from departments in prior fiscal years returns to the undesignated fund balance referred to as free cash. This funding requires a new town meeting vote to authorize a new use of the funds in the following fiscal year. This article includes articles that were intended to be approved at the May 2023 annual meeting, but weren't because free cash was not certified. Those amounts are added to the appropriations that were planned for this current meeting. The OPEB contribution is twice our normal contribution because we missed the annual contribution in May 2023, and two articles dealing with capital from last year are on the warrant again this year, now that free cash is certified.
Thank you. Any discussion on Article 8? Seeing none, all those in favor of Article 8 as printed signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 9, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate or transfer from available funds a sum of money to be expended by the Select Board to operate the ambulance enterprise for fiscal year 2025 as printed, totaling $671,310, with such sum to be raised through department receipts, estimated department receipts of $700,000 and a surplus of $28,690. And that $48,000 and $19,000 be included in appropriations from the general fund for fringe benefits and indirect costs, respectively, as shown in the printed table, and to be allocated to the ambulance enterprise for funding or to take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 9?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 9 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Second?
I have a second.
Motion and a second. Any explanation?
The purpose of this article is to fund the Ambulance Enterprise Fund. The fund is supported by fees collected through ambulance charges. The Fire Chief and Select Board establish the total expenses of the department, including debt service, direct and indirect expenses. Indirect costs are associated with general government costs and fringe benefits that are related to the operation of the ambulance service and are expensed through the general fund or operating budget.
Thank you. Any discussion on Article 9? Seeing none, all those in favor of Article 9 as printed signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 10, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate or transfer from available funds a sum of money to be expended by the Sewer Commission to operate the Sewer Enterprise Fund for fiscal year 2025, as printed, the following sums totaling $3,970,354 from department receipts of $1,740,635, Betterment Fund of $879,356, and retained earnings of $1,350,363, or take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 10?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 10 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any explanation?
Yes, Mr. Moderator. The purpose of this article is to fund the Sewer Enterprise Fund. The fund is supported by sewer usage charges. The sewer rate is set by the Sewer Commission and is established based on the total expenses of the department, including debt service, direct and indirect expenses, and the use of sewer services by residents and businesses. Indirect costs are associated with the general government costs and fringe benefits that are related to the operation of the sewer department and are expensed through the operating budget.
Thank you. Any discussion on Article 10? Seeing no one, all those in favor of Article 10 as printed signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 11, to see if the town will vote to transfer the sum of $185,279 from the PEG fund to the general fund for the following purposes, or take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 11?
I move that the town vote to approve Article 11 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Second.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any explanation?
Mr. Moderator, the PEG, Public Education and Government Channel Program, is supported by franchise fees collected by the town from cable providers. This article transfers the sum of that money from the PEG fund to the general fund to cover PEG expenses such as salaries.
Thank you. Any discussion on Article 11? Seeing no one, all those in favor of Article 11 as printed, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That also carries unanimously. Article 12, to see if the town will vote a sum of money to be appropriated or reserved from estimated annual revenues of the Community Preservation Fund for the fiscal year 2025, with each item to be considered a separate appropriation for the payment of administrative expenses of the Community Preservation Committee, debt service, community preservation projects, and all other necessary and proper expenses as printed in the table in the town meeting guidebook. Do I have a motion on Article 12?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 12 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Second.
Motion and a second. Explanation?
Mr. Moderator, the Community Preservation Committee, the CPC, recommends how funds should be spent or set aside for future spending among the allowable categories of A, open space, B, historic preservation, and C, affordable housing. In addition, a maximum 5% may be spent on administrative expenses by the CPC. Town meeting may either approve or reduce the recommended expenditures, but cannot add to them. Tyngsborough received state matching funds from the Commonwealth for several of the projects recommended this year.
Thank you. Any discussion on Article 12? Sir.
Hi, John Murphy, 61 Ting Road. I'd like discussion on the 10 Merrimack Way Unit C acquisition for $350,000 and understand why that's included in there, and make a motion to amend this article to remove that sum and approve it without that sum.
Okay, do you want the explanation before your motion, or?
Both would be good.
All right, let's have the explanation first.
Happy to. That is a unit that is on the town's SHI, which is our affordable housing inventory. Keeping that above 10% helps us avoid what is commonly called unfriendly 40Bs. And great example of a community that hasn't done that and is facing challenges is Drakeit. Most deed riders on affordable units nowadays survive foreclosure. This is one of the older ones that does not survive foreclosure. In this case, the unit is being foreclosed on. And so if sold not to the town, in all likelihood, a developer would not maintain it as an affordable unit, thus we'd have one less affordable unit on our inventory. At this current point, that would not bring us below the 10%, but certainly it would undo a little bit of work that the town has done to maintain it. The 350 is an allocation, if necessary, to the Affordable Housing Trust to acquire the unit if that opportunity comes up. There's no guarantee that it will. And then any proceeds from reselling it would reimburse the Community Preservation Committee. So the town would not become a landlord. The town actually wouldn't even manage the resale. There are monitoring agents, like CHAPA is one of the big ones, that would market it, make sure that it's deed restricted correctly to be an affordable housing unit, and thus it would remain on our inventory.
Okay, so quick follow-up to that then. If it looks like we're paying market value is what that 350 is for that unit now, and it doesn't sound like if it was affordable housing that they would have paid market value when they purchased it. So would we be able to assume that property at the price that it was bought at the first time? It seems like that the town has taken on a burden to include an additional affordable housing unit on ourselves as opposed to a developer or someone else that's making a project.
So that is an appropriation up to $350,000. Certainly the intent of CPC and the Affordable Housing Trust is to make the bank, which is completing the foreclosure, whole. We don't know if that will work. We don't know how. We know that it was auctioned. There's a potential sale pending, so it's very likely the town doesn't actually get the opportunity. But certainly we would expect, even at the affordable rate, $350,000 would be the affordable rate. Market value would bring that far above the $350,000. Again, the town won't assume any of the burden. Once it's acquired, CHAPA, which is the monitoring agency, it's governed by a bunch of different state statutes, they would manage the marketing of it, the resale of it, and then all of the proceeds would reimburse the Community Preservation Committee.
Okay, so Mike, in that, it sounds like this potential would get that for less than the $350,000 if they're going at the foreclosure rate, and that it wouldn't be a windfall that the seller is going to have on that, and that the town is going to be absorbing half the cost, for example, on then making it affordable after the fact.
Correct.
It sounds like it's going to be taken care of at that rate.
Correct, and it's also very likely that the town is never even given the opportunity. This was a proactive measure by the CPC and the Affordable Housing Trust to do what they could to maintain one unit, but you're correct. The town would be made whole through the sale, and by the town I mean the CPC. It would have to go back to CPC.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Article 12? Yep, come right up. Name and address?
Yeah, I'm Jen Roma, and I live at 16 Oak Street. My son and I questioned why you are allocating funds for the Lake Massapog and the Lake Mascuppick and not Long Pond. We're over there, and I'm just curious because they actually ask people in our community to make private donations, and that's how they treat the weeds over there. So why they would not appear on your list, I was just curious.
Sure.
Happy to
Town
take that one.
manager,
This is just a list of applications that we've received, so I can
Okay.
certainly send you the application.
Okay.
Town meeting, we have a special town meeting in the bylaw in October, so any application submitted to CPC is considered, and certainly both Lake Mascuppick and Lake Massapog got on this list originally because the Lake Association submitted a request.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
I can also help with that too. I actually went to Drake at CPC with the association from Long Pond probably 10 or 12 years ago to get funding to start their program. So I'm not sure if they still go to CPC there, but they had originally gotten money from the Drake at CPC.
Yeah, I was just curious why they didn't appear on the list.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Article 12? Seeing no one, all those in favor of Article 12 as printed signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries unanimously. Article 13, to see if the town will vote to approve payment on the following bills which were incurred during a previous fiscal year, 2023, $418 to the Law Office of Ronald Berenson, and $741.39 to the University of Massachusetts Lowell Police Department. And this requires a 4/5 vote. Do I have a motion on Article 13?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 13 as printed in the Finance Committee Guidebook.
Is there a second?
I second.
Motion and a second. Any explanation?
Yes, bills incurred in a previous fiscal year cannot be paid by the town until they have been approved by town meeting. This article seeks authorization to pay 2 bills that were incurred during fiscal year 2023. These bills will be paid out of the existing fiscal '24 budget and do not represent new appropriations.
Thank you. Any further discussion or any discussion on Article 13? Seeing no one, all those in favor of Article 13 as printed signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 14, to see if the town will vote to authorize the Select Board to acquire by gift, purchase, eminent domain, or otherwise for open space and recreation purposes to be under the care, custody, and control of the Select Board, certain property off Sherburne Avenue identified as parcels A, C, and D on a plan entitled Tyngsborough Country Club, Sherburne Avenue, Tyngsborough, Massachusetts, dated February 12, 1987, and recorded with the Middlesex North District Registry of Deeds at Plan Book 158, page 89, and as Parcel D on a plan entitled Plan of Land in Tyngsborough, Mass., dated July 14, 1980, and recorded with the aforesaid Registry of Deeds at Plan Book 141, page 137, also known as Assessor's Tax Parcels 27 to 73, 27-73, 27-74, and 21-41. Together with any and all structures and improvements thereon, presently owned of record by Toll Northeast 5 Corp. And further, to authorize the Select Board to negotiate and enter into any and all agreements and/or to execute any and all instruments as may be necessary on behalf of the town to effect the aforesaid acquisition or take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 14?
Mr. Moderator, I move the town vote to approve Article 14 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any explanation?
Mr. Moderator, Article 14 seeks town meeting authorization to formally accept the parcel of land containing roughly 30 acres donated to the town from Toll Brothers as a part of the development of the former Tyngsborough Country Club. Toll Brothers was required to donate the land, renovate the clubhouse, and install walking trails on the site, all of which have been completed. Additionally, CPC authorized $800,000 at the May 2023 town meeting to construct sports amenities on this site. That work can commence as soon as the land is formally accepted by the town.
Thank you. Any discussion on Article 14?
I'm not opposed to this, by the way. But I do think this is a good time to memorialize the conversation I had at pre-town meeting about the stormwater issues that Toll Brothers is supposed to be responsible for even after we accept that here today. There's still a stormwater issue that could affect the 30 acres that we're going to accept this evening. I'd like someone to describe that so it's memorialized this evening at this meeting.
All right. Mr. Town Manager?
Happy to do so. Mr. Crawford is correct. Toll Brothers is still actively before both the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission with water challenges on the development side of the parcel, which either do or could have impacts on the side that they're donating to the town. The Select Board has no authority over site plan review or over any of the regulatory authority that the Planning Board has, the Zoning Board of Appeals, or the Conservation Commission. However, when the Select Board was made aware of these pending water challenges on the development side, the Select Board, prior to confirming that the work that Toll Brothers was required to do, which included renovating the clubhouse, installing walking trails, and memorializing a parking lot, before they agreed that that work had been done, they required Toll Brothers to enter into an agreement with the town, which is recorded at the Registry of Deeds, that did a few things. One, it required that in order to address potential water issues, if they're not addressed in their regulatory process with the Planning Board, that they would have to install drainage structures on the town side, underground, so they didn't impact the sport amenities that we're looking to install there and that CPC appropriated money for, that they would have to do it at their own expense, that they had to provide the town with a bond sufficient to cover the amount of work, which they've given the town a bond, and that they had to go back to the Conservation Commission, which has stormwater authority in Tyngsborough, to apply to amend their stormwater permit. In doing so, an amendment to their stormwater permit would not only give them the permission to change what was already approved for stormwater, it would require that the homeowners association at Toll Brothers be responsible for future maintenance on those drainage structures. And so what that agreement does is says the town is ready to accept this land so that the work that was approved by CPC and town meeting can commence. However, to protect the land, Toll Brothers had to do certain things, which they did. What it doesn't do is say that Toll Brothers gets a free pass from any of the agreements that they had with the Planning Board or from having to deal with the regulatory authority that by statute and by the town's bylaws lays with the Conservation Commission. Additionally, if something dramatic were to happen and tomorrow the site wasn't ready for us to construct things on, the vote tonight simply gives the Select Board the ability to record the deed, but it doesn't require that they do it immediately. So all that is happening tonight is town meeting is saying that it's okay with the Select Board accepting this parcel of land. And again, I would note that the donation of that 30 or so acres was a requirement of the development going in across the street. I think that covers what we talked about, Mr. Crawford. You're welcome.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion on Article 14? Seeing no one, all those in favor of Article 14 as printed signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 15, to see if the town will vote to authorize the Select Board to petition the General Court of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to pass an act entitled, "An Act Authorizing the Town of Tyngsborough to Grant Additional Licenses for the Sale of Alcoholic Beverages," being substantially as printed in the town meeting guidebook, or take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 15?
I move that the town vote to approve Article 15 as presented in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Second?
I second that, Mr. Moderator.
Motion and a second. Any explanation?
Mr. Moderator, Article 15 seeks town meeting authorization for the Select Board to file a Home Rule petition to the General Court of the Commonwealth to request 3 additional on-premise all alcoholic beverages licenses. These would replace 3 that expired in 2021 before being granted to the 440 Middlesex Road development.
Thank you. Any discussion on Article 15? Seeing no one, all those in favor of Article 15 as printed signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 16, to see if the town will vote to terminate the dedication of 75% of adult-use marijuana local sales tax revenues to the Road Maintenance Stabilization Fund effective July 1, 2025, as approved by Article 3 on the 2021 special town meeting warrant, or take any other action relative thereto. This requires a 2/3 vote to approve. And do I have a motion on Article 16?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 16 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Second.
Motion and a second, and we have a presentation from our town manager on this one.
Absolutely. I just wanted to quickly cover our road maintenance history here in Tyngsborough. I would note that beginning somewhere around fiscal 21 and fiscal 22 is when the town started to contribute substantially from the operating budget. Municipalities in Massachusetts rely heavily on Chapter 90 funds, which come from the state. They're reserved specifically for road maintenance projects. The problem is, over the course of the last 10 years, that money has not really increased, and so we get anywhere between $400,000 to $430,000 in Chapter 90. Nowadays, that won't even pave one complete road. Going back to fiscal year 2022, that's basically all we used to spend was Chapter 90 and some general fund when it was possible. Over the last 3 fiscal years, including the current one, we've spent more than $1 million on roads. In fiscal 22, we spent $1.3 million and touched 3.6 miles. In fiscal 23, we introduced preservation methods, which are intended to prevent roads from getting into failed condition, because once a road gets into failed condition, it's even more expensive to replace. We also, of course, maintained our projects of replacing failed roads at that same time. That project touched 8.6 miles and cost $1.4 million. This current fiscal year 24, we've touched 1.6 miles and it cost $1.4 million. And I want to note that this is strictly planned road projects. Things come up all the time that we have to address that are culverts that wash out, et cetera, that sometimes we have to tap into the operating budget for. The fiscal year 2025 plan touches 3.2 miles of road and costs $1.4 million. The way we've been able to do this is by increasing steadily, we talked about this on Article 6, the amount of money that's contributed from the general fund, leveraging every penny of the Chapter 90 money we get, and almost 3 years ago, town meeting dedicated 75% of all cannabis excise to the Road Maintenance Stabilization Fund. Cannabis excise is a 3% tax charged on top of retail sales for adult use marijuana. The town has been putting 75% of that into road maintenance, 25% falls into the general fund. Articles 16, 17, and 18 are tied together. The only way that Articles 17 and 18 can be considered is if first Article 16 passes, which terminates the town meeting dedication of 75% to the Road Maintenance Stabilization Fund, and then Articles 17 and 18 change that percentage so that 50% will continue to go into road maintenance stabilization, 25% will now go into debt stabilization, which again is to help offset future debt payments while maintaining the town's $1 million contribution. So looking back over our cannabis excise, we've received roughly $1.1 million. It's trended higher some years. Certainly in this current year, we're trending higher than $1.1 million. and that is due to increased sales. Each year, we've appropriated between $600,000 and $800,000, which was in a prior article, from that road maintenance stabilization fund for use on the current fiscal year's road projects. It's important to note that we don't spend down the stabilization account to zero. If you look in the Finance Committee guidebook, the balance right now is something like $1.25 million, and this town meeting only allocated $800,000. So we always leave a buffer. Looking ahead at fiscal year '25, we're projecting that we'd receive about $1.6 million in total cannabis excise. That's a combination of factors. One, it's based on current trends. Like I said, we're trending much higher than our budgeted projection for fiscal '24. And we also anticipate at some point in fiscal '25 the opening of a second retail marijuana establishment. To be clear, the sales will not double because they'll be competing with each other, but we certainly will experience a boost as other communities that have more than one license do. Looking at the numbers, using that $1.6 million number, which of course increases annually, at 50%, we would still be able to deposit at least $800,000 into the road maintenance stabilization fund annually, which means that we would be able to continue to allocate $800,000 from the fund for road maintenance projects as we have in this current fiscal year and in prior fiscal years. But what it would also do is allow us to deposit close to $400,000 into the debt stabilization fund to protect the town in future years and again maintain the $1 million commitment to the middle school. That $1 million commitment reserved the new growth we'd experienced from Toll Brothers, but you only experience that new growth once. It's not like every year after that we'll have a new $1 million. It becomes part of your tax levy. It increases by 2.5%. But as you get beyond the first 2 or 3 years, we see it happening in other communities. Resources get tighter. By building up that debt stabilization, it helps us, one, maintain the $1 million commitment, but two, also avoid looking at dramatic cuts or 2.5 overrides, as many of our neighbors have. And certainly, I can't predict the future, but based on our current financial projections, we are in a positive place. So the bottom line here is that even with the split changing, the funding that will be available for our roads projects will not decrease. In fact, it's increasing as I demonstrate in this next slide. One of the new things that came online in fiscal year '24, and we'll certainly see in fiscal year '25, is the Fair Share Amendment, otherwise known as the Millionaire's Tax. That dedicated a certain percent of the revenues collected to education and a certain percent to transportation projects. Tyngsborough's share of the transportation part only comes to about $240,000, which we're now receiving on top of our annual $420,000 Chapter 90 allocation. So this chart just shows that in fiscal year '24, available for us to spend is about $1.4 million. In fiscal '25, based on the budget that was approved by town meeting earlier this evening, and including the Fair Share Act, that totals about $1.7 million. And you can see that in the next 2 fiscal years, fiscal year '26 and fiscal year '27, assuming that we aren't able to increase our general fund contribution, you still see that we have equal, if not greater, amount of money available to spend on roads. The only other point I want to make on the roads is that Tyngsborough's engineering department consists of 1 employee, so even if we threw $3 million on top of this, there is still a capacity piece as well that we deal with. That's all I got.
Thank you for that. Any discussion on Article 16?
John Murphy, 61 Ting Road. I just want to express to everyone that right now our roads are still horrible, and I think it's a great idea to reallocate the funds from that marijuana distribution once the roads are fixed. But until such time as the roads are fixed, I think we should be dedicating that 75 contribution that we discussed a couple years ago towards fixing the roads. And to speak to the 1 employee, $3 million question, that's a management issue for the town that we should then be hiring more people or consultants or other things to improve the speed at which the road projects get done, because at that pace, I don't think we'll ever get things done. So we should be focusing, leaving the money where it is for the roads, and once the roads are better, then we can talk about when and where to reallocate those funds. Thank you.
Thank you.
Billy Crawford, 83 Frost Road. I need to talk about the fair share. don't know if people understand, part of what he was talking about is the millionaire tax, which is 4% on millionaires that we passed. We get $243 this next year dedicated to roads. Well, that's the reason they did that, is so we'd have more money for roads. If we're going to take money out of the cannabis funds and replace it with a fair share, that's a break even. We have no more money for roads. And by the way, I did bring up at the pre-town meeting, this article really doesn't become effective till July 1, 2025. So I don't know why we had 2 other town meetings to attack this, because I'm not sure this fair share is going to be, if it's going to keep coming, or this is going to be a one-shot deal, or what's going to happen in this economic conditions in this state, okay? And a lot of people are going to be surprised when they get their middle school tax bills in the third quarter. So we should keep all our money for roads. We shouldn't be funding the middle school, which is what we're trying to do. The town's $1 million share is going to come from that. They can paint it any color they want, but that's what's going on. They want to take some of the cannabis money to help them pay for the middle school. So we need to fix our roads. We already have a middle school. Let's fix our roads too, and let's keep the cannabis money just the way it is.
Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Just to add on that, I alluded to this earlier. The debt stabilization is not middle school stabilization. It's debt stabilization. It's short-term debt. It's long-term debt. We have some items that we've been pushing off. For the fire department, there's a ladder truck that is, well, it was $1.2 million a few years ago. I believe it's going to be somewhere north of $1.5 million. And the reality is, we've got a bunch of items that we're going to have to continue to tap into from a debt standpoint, and we have to start saving for that debt. It's not just middle school debt.
I can't afford any more debt.
Further discussion, Article 16. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Diane LaRose, 6 Sleepy Hollow Lane. I think we need to leave this alone for now, revisit this maybe again in the future, once our roads are better. I wish I could show you a picture. I don't know if that's possible for people to see. You know, I walk a lot. The roads are horrible. This isn't very far from the new middle school, the picture that I just took today. The sidewalk just completely disappears. The roads are falling apart, and we're going to take money away. And I know you're saying we're probably going to have the same amount of money with the new income and such, but why not make more repairs before we scale back? Use the new money to make more repairs rather than scaling back before the roads are fixed. My mom lives off Old Ting Road. They lined it today. I don't know why. The road's a complete mess. There's potholes everywhere, but they lined it today. That's a waste of money, in my opinion, because the road needs to be completely fixed. So I ask that we vote no on this, and this is, revisited maybe a couple years from now. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion?
Hi, Renee Boyle, 31 Bowers Ave. With this new cannabis, will there be a traffic light there? There's more traffic in and out of there than the mall. So with another cannabis, would there be a traffic light? It just seems like it's very busy there.
Well, that's a little outside of this article, but let the town manager
I have a very quick response. Middlesex Road is a state road, and my understanding is there is an application to MassDOT for a signalized intersection that would tie in a few of those parcels right there. So the answer is, it's up to the state, but they have submitted an application, and if the application is approved by MassDOT, my understanding is that they would have to tie into that signalized intersection.
All right, thank you very much. Great job, everyone, especially the police and the fire department. They've been at our house a couple times over the last 2 weeks. And my thank you to the fire and to the police. They were amazing. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Further discussion on Article 16.
Susan Morey, 24 Cricket Lane. The only point I would make is that New Hampshire is coming very close to legalizing recreational marijuana. And if that happens, a lot of those people that are coming here to Tyngsborough are not coming to Tyngsborough. They're going to buy it in New Hampshire. So the revenue that you're projecting could very well be nothing, no increase, maybe even less, because a lot of, I mean, I drive that road myself. A lot of those cars have New Hampshire plates on them. And if New Hampshire legalizes it, our revenue is going to go down. Just something to consider.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion on Article 16? Okay, seeing no one. All those in favor of Article 16 as printed signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. That was pretty split, so we're going to go to a hand count. It requires a 2/3 majority to pass. So why don't you take out your purple cards, and if I could get a couple of counters, some volunteers. We've got one here. 2 on each side would be great. Dr. Flanagan? Rob? All right, so we're going to take the yes votes first. Hold your ticket up and keep it up so that they can count it. So all those in favor of Article 16 signify by holding up your ticket. Did you count up here? Plus me?
44 yes. Including what?
I don't know which side it's on, but I'll let you decide that myself.
Did you count finance? No, they didn't, so they're just on this side. Right?
Me too.
63, okay. All those opposed to Article 16 signify by holding up your cards. Fails.
Bye-bye. Thanks for playing. 63 to 50.
So what's 63 over 113? So the vote was 63 in favor, 50 opposed. That does not carry.
Mr. Moderator? I move to pull Articles 17 and 18 from the warrant.
Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to withdraw Articles 17 and 18. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to withdraw Articles 17 and 18 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 19, to see if the town will vote to accept the layout of certain town ways below described made by the Select Board under the provisions of Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 82, Sections 21 through 24, and any other enabling statute filed in the office of the town clerk with the plan there mentioned and referred to for a more particular description as follows. Farmers Way, Tyngsborough, Mass., shown on a plan entitled Street Acceptance Plan, Farmers Way, Tyngsborough, Mass., dated January 24th, 2024. Scale 1 inch equals 40 feet, prepared by Norse Design Services, Inc., being sheet 1 of 2 to be recorded with the Middlesex North District Registry of Deeds. And further, to authorize the Select Board to accept an instrument conveying for nominal consideration the aforesaid roadway or interests therein, together with all easements and appurtenances thereto, as are shown on the aforementioned plan, or take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 19?
I move that the town vote to approve Article 19 as printed in the Finance Committee Guidebook.
Second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Explanation?
This article asks town meeting to formally accept Farmers Way as a public road. The road has been fully surveyed, reviewed by the engineering department, recommended for acceptance by the planning board, and following a public hearing, recommended for acceptance by the select board. If approved, Farmers Way will become a public way under the jurisdiction of the town.
Thank you. Any discussion on Article 19? Seeing none, all those in favor of Article 19 as printed signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 20, to see if the town will vote to amend the Town of Tyngsborough zoning bylaw, Section 4.3, Table of Uses, by adding the language in bold and removing the language with the strike-through, or to take any other action relative thereto. And within that printed article, there's a table, and you can see that there are changes to the assisted living and continuing care campus uses within the B2 district to change that from being prohibited to allowed by permit of the planning board. This is a citizen's petition. I understand that we have counsel for the petitioner who'd like to speak on this article. Sir, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Town meeting members. My name is Douglas DeShane. I went to law firm of Finneran and Nicholson with offices in Westford and Newburyport. I'm here this evening speaking in support of Article 20, which was a citizen's petition to allow for a change to your zoning bylaw that would allow assisted living and continuing care campuses within your B2 zoning district. However, I want to point out that this would not allow these uses by right, but would rather, you would be required to seek a special permit from the planning board in order to obtain a permit to do this if this article is passed. The latest Tyngsborough housing production plan stated that the number of residents aged 60 through 74 in the town will increase by 109% between the period of 2010 and 2040. So we are technically in the middle. And as statistics have shown, the population in Tyngsborough is truly aging. And we have a lot more citizens in that 60 to 74-year-old range. In 2020, this town meeting overwhelmingly supported to allow nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and continuing care campuses in your B2 zone. However, we stand here 4 years later, and there has yet to be a project proposed within that zone. So we are still faced with a shortage of that type of housing. This article would allow for those uses, assisted living and continuing care campuses, to be allowed in the B3 zone, provided you receive the special permit that I mentioned earlier. There are a number of benefits to the town in allowing the development of assisted living and continuing care campuses. First of all, under your bylaw, those projects would be required to provide 10% of their units as affordable. So it is yet another mechanism for the development of affordable housing in town, although this would be focused on seniors. These types of projects generally generate tax revenue of a residential use, yet they do not contribute any impacts to your school system. There will be, there are no children here, so while they're paying the residential taxes, they're not adding to the burden of the school system. These types of projects generally create less traffic and cars than the current commercial uses that you allow in your B3 zone. And they typically allow for the preservation of open space and are far much less intrusive than the types of commercial uses that you do currently allow in the B3. But most importantly, this change will hopefully allow the development of some of your B3 zone into these types of uses, which would satisfy a significant unmet need in Tyngsborough, and that is to provide affordable assisted living options for the Tyngsborough seniors. So I thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you for that. I do need a motion on Article 20. It's the citizens petition. You can't. Yeah, a resident needs to make a motion on Article 20. I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion and a second. And just to clarify, it's B2 it would change, not B3. That's the way I've got it printed. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's presently allowed in B3 by permit from the planning board. And you're looking to add B2.
Yeah. Sorry.
Any discussion or questions on Article 20?
Ray Ann J6, 79 Muscopet Trail. I would like some clarification then of how B2 and B3 remain two distinct zones.
Sure. You want to address that? Or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
What this is doing is amending the table of uses, which is a table in our bylaw that says this use can be done in this zone, or this zone by special permit or by right. This is not changing the zone, so the maps stay the same. What's a B2 today will be a B2 tomorrow. This is just saying that a assisted living facility and a continuing care campus, which is currently permissible in a B3, will now also be permissible in a B2. So there's no change to what is a B2 and what is a B3.
Thank you.
With a special permit, yes, correct.
Further discussion?
Can I ask a question?
Sure, come on up.
Nancy Burr, 14 Diaz Drive. Maybe everybody else understands, but I don't know where any B2 properties are. Can you kind of give me an idea?
Sure, there's this large one on Kendall Road, and then Eric Solano, our town planner, can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm correct. The rest of them are along Middlesex Road and Westford Road probably too.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to clarify that the B2 district, you were answering a question about what B2 parcels might be eligible for an application under this use, which is all the parcels in the B2 district that are greater than 4 acres per parcel. But the B2 district extends essentially expanding out from the town center. It goes across the bridge to a certain portion of the town, as well as it follows down Kendall Road, as well as down Middlesex Road and slightly up Middlesex Road, it might be a couple of parcels beyond Bryant Lane.
Any further discussion on Article 20? Seeing no one, all those in favor of Article 20 as printed signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That does carry.
You've got to announce 2/3.
By two, yeah, I believe I think I had announced it was a 2/3 at the beginning.
On the vote, you've got to
Okay.
announce it by 2/3.
I heard 2 noes and multiple, much more yes, so that does carry by 2/3 at least, if not more. Okay, Article 21, to see if the town will vote to amend the Town of Tyngsborough zoning bylaw, Section 4.3, Table of Uses, by adding the language in bold and removing the language with the strike-through, or to take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 21?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 21 as printed in the Finance Committee Guidebook.
Do I have a second? Second. Motion and a second. Explanation?
Yes, Mr. Moderator. This article seeks to reaffirm the town's prohibition on solid waste disposal uses in the industrial district.
Thank you. Any discussion on Article 21? Seeing none, all those in favor of Article 21 as printed signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 22, to see if the town will vote to amend the Town of Tyngsborough zoning bylaw, Section 9.1, inclusionary zoning, by adding the language in bold and removing the language with the strike-through, as printed in the town meeting guidebook. And you can see paragraph D is being deleted, and one sentence is being added to paragraph E. Do I have a motion on Article 22?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 22 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Second.
Motion and a second. Explanation?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, this article would amend the town's inclusionary bylaw, which governs the requirement that development projects include a certain percent of affordable units by eliminating the ability of a developer to meet the affordable unit requirements of the bylaw using alternative methods. If approved, a developer would then be required to achieve compliance by constructed units on site.
Thank you. Any discussion on Article 22? Yep.
John Murphy, 61 Ting Road. I just want to clarify the part about the intent and the ability for a developer to meet the requirements for affordable housing by using an alternative piece of land. And I'm trying to figure out, like if I'm building an over 55 community and I want to have that be all over 55, and I want to have an affordable housing that meets the numbers requirements in a separate location, that you're saying with this that won't be okay anymore. Is that what I'm hearing?
Sort of. I'd ask our town planner, Eric Salerno, to clarify that.
Sure. Currently, the zoning bylaw for inclusionary zoning includes provisions that enable a developer to come up with other methods besides the construction of the actual units in order to meet the inclusionary zoning requirement. So to answer your question directly, it's correct. The builder will no longer be able to donate land or make financial contributions in lieu of actually constructing those affordable units. The inclusionary zoning bylaw, at least by the planning board's interpretation, the purpose and the intent is to have those units get constructed. Although the bylaws provided some alternative methods, they've proven to be potentially inefficient and potentially not adequate in order to get the sufficient number or the required number of units constructed. Does that help?
Well, yeah, you might want to stand there just for the follow-up. So right now, there's an opportunity for people to do things in lieu of. So I'll speak to you, but I'm speaking to him. To me, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I know we want to encourage development in town. We want to encourage affordable housing where it needs to be to meet our numbers and our quotas. I just don't see anything wrong necessarily with hamstringing the builder to not be able to do an in-kind contribution of land or monies that would, as long as they're sufficient enough to provide the numbers that we're looking for. Like if we're at 10.2% affordable housing, we don't need to increase our numbers. Or we could have the number of units that are being in there have a dollar amount or something in lieu of that would keep us within the thresholds that we need to be. And as long as the numbers are large enough, we should be able to make that in-kind contribution beneficial to the town and encourage the development the way it was supposed to be.
Thank you. Anything further from our town planner?
Thank you. So there are a couple of things that I thought town meeting might want to take into consideration for that. As a planner and the economic development director, I do share some of the perspective associated with trying to be as builder-friendly as possible. But I also try to take into consideration I don't want to say the convenience, but the effectiveness of the inclusionary zoning bylaw to get those units constructed themselves. Part of the process for one of the upcoming articles for MBTA communities was to provide an economic feasibility analysis that determined whether or not housing development would be adversely affected by a 12.5% inclusionary requirement. And the profitability associated with that third-party analysis showed that there was no threat to development based on a 12.5% inclusionary requirement. So without speaking directly for the planning board, there were planning board members that felt like this amendment helped protect the town's ability to provide compliance with the inclusionary zoning bylaw and its intent.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion on Article 22? Seeing none, all those in favor of Article, this does require a 2/3 vote. All those in favor of Article 22 as printed, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That does carry by 2/3. Article 23, to see if the town will vote to amend the Town of Tyngsborough zoning bylaw, Section 9.2, special permit, open space residential development by adding the language in bold and removing the language with the strike-through as printed in town meeting guidebook, or take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 23?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 23 as printed in the Finance Committee guidebook.
Is there a second? Second. Motion and a second. Explanation.
This article would amend the town zoning bylaw by striking the requirement that town meeting approve an open space residential development plan before a special permit can be issued by the planning board. This is in response to a review of the Attorney General's office, which deemed that provision unlawful.
Thank you. Any discussion on Article 23?
And once again, I think it'd be fair to the residents to give a little more explanation of what this really means. There's open space instead of an acre and a half. There's a development, and 10 of the homes would each give a half acre. It would become open space. That's kind of an overview if they would give it, so people understand what they're voting on.
I will once again summons our town planner, Eric Salerno.
I just want to get confirmation that the request for information was to help explain what the open space residential development bylaw is and how it works? Yes. Okay, very briefly, what it enables a developer to do is analyze a subdivision plan to identify how many housing units would be developable based on the regular R1 or its own district zoning. So in Tyngsborough, the R1 district is 1.5 acres per single family home. So you'd essentially divide up the parcels by 1.5 acre buildable areas. Then you have the opportunity to shrink down those parcels to consolidate the neighborhood development in order to preserve publicly usable open space in that neighborhood or that portion of town. So you'd have smaller buildable lots and larger contiguous land areas for open space for the public to use.
Any further discussion on Article 23? Seeing no one, all those in favor of Article 23 as printed, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 24, to see if the town will vote to amend the Town of Tyngsborough zoning bylaw, Section 4.3, Table of Uses, by adding the language in bold and removing the language with the strike-through as printed in Town Meeting Guidebook, or take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 24?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 24 as printed in the Finance Committee Guidebook.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Explanation?
Yes, Mr. Moderator. This article would amend the town's zoning bylaw by amending the table of uses to allow a farmer's market in all business districts. Currently, a farmer's market requires a special permit by the Select Board, which is a costly and lengthy process for any applicant. These would continue to be regulated by the Board of Health.
Thank you. Any discussion on Article 24? Seeing no one, all those in favor of Article 24 as printed, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That does carry unanimously. Article 25, to see if the town will vote to amend Section 10, Special District Regulations of the town's zoning bylaw by adding a new subsection shown below, or to take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 25?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve Article 25 as printed in the Finance Committee Guidebook.
Second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any explanation?
Yes, this article is the town's response to the MBTA Communities Act, which requires communities with some level of service or adjacent to service provided by the MBTA to adopt a zoning districts where multifamily housing is permitted by right. Tyngsborough is required to comply by law because it has been classified as an adjacent community. The zoning article creates 3 sub-districts, all of which are located along Middlesex Road. Although this language allows the development of multifamily housing without a special permit, the planning board retains site plan review authority.
Thank you for that. Any discussion on Article 25?
We have the presentation.
And we have a presentation from
Our town planner.
Our town planner. Why don't, go ahead.
Billy Crawford, 83 Frost Road. I'll say this again like I did in a pre-town meeting. This is what socialism looks like. This is it. This is exactly what it looks like. The state put its thumb on the scale. All the past zoning laws, zoning articles that we just voted on required a 2/3 majority. The state decided this is only a simple majority. They put the thumb on the scale, okay? I feel really bad. The zoning review committee, they did everything they could to make this as best they could for us and still comply. I understand what they did. It's still bad, but I do understand what they tried to do. I do get it. I feel bad for the community that we even have to deal with this. This is foolishness. The state telling us what we have to do in our own community. I do have to talk about, to make people understand, and I know there's words that dance around things. There are 3 parcels. One of them is the old pumpkin patch, okay, along South Middlesex Road that already has buildings on it. I think that's Riley Road through there. They can put 3-story buildings in that. They'll have as of right. That doesn't mean, I know it doesn't mean they're going to do it tomorrow, but as of right, they can do it at some point in time. There could be 3-story buildings. That's the only way we can get 750 units of housing on 50 acres of land. There must be 15 units of housing on every acre of land. It's mandated. That's the way it has to be. Okay? Tyngsborough didn't choose. But that's a 3-story building. Okay? The other one I want to talk about is behind, well, I won't talk about Olive Garden. It's behind Olive Garden. The one that's most likely to be built on, according to town planner and others, is on the Pheasant Lane Mall, across from the old TJ Maxx Mall, well, we all know it as, but it's now 440. That first exit you come in, the parking lot to the left and the parking lot to the right where they train them on motorcycles, those could become an apartment buildings, a housing project. I think it's like 160, I don't remember the exact number, 180 of 3-story buildings, 36 to 40 feet high. Just people need to understand what they're being asked to do. So, and we could, and now would we have had every unit of housing must, by state law, be able to house families. There's no, you can't have over 55. It has to house families, which most likely will have children. There'll be school buses going, if they're built, at the Pheasant Lane Mall, pulling out of there next door to the casino, going by 2 cannabis stores. Do you think we would have had cannabis stores? We'd have had cannabis stores going there if we knew that children are going to be living at the Pheasant Lane Mall? I don't think so. That's all I got to say.
All right, thank you, Mr. Crawford. Do you mind if we take our town planner? All right, we're going to do that just so he can. Oop.
All right, thanks very much. If you want to pull up some of the slides so that the folks at town meeting can walk through. Thank you very much. All right, so the law, which is a new section of Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 3A, that's the Zoning Act. Chapter 358 of the Acts of 2020, which is some of the legislation that the previous speaker was referencing, amended the State Zoning Act to stimulate economic development and address the housing crisis by encouraging new housing near transit. It's part of the state's 2021 economic development legislation, and it requires specific communities, 177 of them in all, to create a zoning district, not specifically the construction of housing, where multifamily housing is allowed as of right. The purpose behind the MBTA communities legislation is part of the Commonwealth strategy and effort to address the glaring shortage of housing. As we all know, demand of housing has far exceeded supply or new development for perhaps the last 40 years, according to some studies, resulting in cost and valuation increases that have outpaced inflation, which I'm sure plenty of us have felt with our tax bills. The state seeks to address the #1 reason why major employers have listed as a competitive disadvantage for Massachusetts, which is housing availability and its cost. Zoning has historically been a barrier to the creation of diverse housing stock in suburban communities. The legislation encourages development that's suitable and more accessible to a broader spectrum of community members, young people, older people looking to downsize, and others who cannot afford or do not want a single-family home. The next slide shows the Massachusetts map that identifies the 177 communities that are identified in the legislation itself. There are 4 categories of these communities: rapid transit communities, which have the most stringent requirements; commuter rail communities, which have the next most stringent requirements; adjacent communities like Tyngsborough, because we are adjacent to Lowell; and adjacent small towns. So essentially, the legislation's requirements get less stringent as you go from community categories 1 through 4. Article 25 is requiring or is asking Tyngsborough to consider a zoning-only proposal. This is not developable units. The characteristics of the zoning district is 50 acres, a minimum of 50% of which must be contiguous, and no sub-districts can be less than 5 acres. As the previous speaker had mentioned, it does require a density of 15 units per acre, which calculates out to a 750 unit capacity. I'd like to point out, however, that construction or the immediate buildability of these units is not required. So you can pick a zoning district that already has buildings or other types of construction on the ground and might not be buildable for decades. The previous speaker also correctly identified that there's no age or bedroom restrictions. But I'd like to point out that an age-restricted proposal would be perfectly acceptable within this district if it was a multifamily housing development. The location should be near transportation and commerce centers. Tyngsborough Zoning Review Committee did its best to keep it near a commerce center towards the northern portion of Middlesex Road. And the affordability in the legislation or the guidelines themselves, the state had limited the affordability to no more than 10%. The Zoning Review Committee and the Planning Office coordinated with the Economic Office of Housing and Livable Communities and Mass Housing Partnership to conduct an economic feasibility analysis through a third party that, as I had mentioned earlier this evening, proved that a 12.5% affordability requirement would not be prohibitive for development itself. The reason why the Zoning Review Committee arrived at this 12.5% number is it works out quite conveniently for construction units of approximately 8. So 1 out of every 8 would be 12.5%. The question about what does as of right mean, for clarification, it does mean that their special permits, variances, or zoning amendments would not be required. No additional energy or other types of restrictions can be exclusively applied to this overlay district, and that site plan review with reasonable conditions, however, are allowed. The Zoning Review Committee made it clear that they wanted the same site plan review process, that section that's identified in the zoning bylaw, to apply to the MBTA community's proposals. So why should Tyngsborough as a community comply? First and foremost, it's the law. The Attorney General has maintained and expressed in multiple advisory letters that compliance is not optional. While there is at least one lawsuit related to this legislation, at least one of those was brought by the Attorney General's office against those communities to determine whether or not, or basically to help bring them into compliance. There is some discussion about whether or not Section B of the legislation itself is an opt-out clause. The Attorney General's office has made it clear that that is not the case. Another important reason for the community to consider is that the community's grant funding depends on it. The town has done a wonderful job applying for grants, and compliance maintains eligibility for state funding programs for housing, economic development, infrastructure, and transportation. Tyngsborough has utilized more than $7 million in grant funding across just 3 specific programs that will now only be available to communities that are in compliance. $6.5 million was received for Mass Works. This number includes a $2 million economic development grant that is currently in process on Kendall Road, and falling out of compliance may result in Tyngsborough needing to repay that grant. Some other examples include $350,000 for Housing Choice grants that helped improve the town center, as well as a $250,000 Community Compact grant. There are also additional discretionary grants that have been received, but will now take MBTA communities' compliance into consideration for eligibility. Although there are specific grant programs that are listed in the legislation itself, the state's discretionary authority for grants enable it to expand that scope. Additional reasons why Tyngsborough should comply: it aligns with the goals listed in Tyngsborough's own housing production plan, adopted by the Planning Board and Select Board, which include providing a wide range of housing options so as to meet the housing needs of a diverse population, addressing needs of first-time home buyers, which have become exacerbated, create diverse rental units in terms of types of units and the numbers of bedrooms for each, supporting the creation of workforce housing units, and developing rental and ownership options for seniors, people with disabilities, and veterans that allow them to live independently. And lastly, I might make the case that it makes economic development sense. Potential multifamily housing located at the northern commercial corridor along Middlesex Road would support the retail and hospitality strategy that has been helping Tyngsborough successfully compete with tax-free New Hampshire. So what types of efforts have gone into Tyngsborough's proposed strategy? I'd like to take just a moment to express my specific thanks to the individuals that work for the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments. Mike Asciola is in attendance tonight, as well as the staff that he shares his office with. They provided many hours and a lot of resources to the town in order to come up with a proposal for compliance. I'd also like to express thanks to the Zoning Review Committee that's contributed over a dozen meetings and over 30 to 34 hours of discussion dedicated specifically to this issue. Those committee members, consisting of members from the Select Board, Planning Board, Zoning Board of Appeals, and residents at large, have worked with Northern Middlesex Council of Governments to develop the strategy that's presented here, including the district maps. The Zoning Review Committee drafted an action plan back in 2022, which was reviewed and approved by the Select Board and Planning Boards and submitted to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, formerly known as the Department of Housing and Community Development, back in January of 2023. Over the past year, the committee, I mentioned, has held over 10 meetings. 2 public informations have been held, which included explanations about the law. Constructive conversations were held during those meetings about the draft zoning language and the overlay zoning district boundaries. And drafts of the language and overlay districts were also sent to not only the Attorney General's office, but also the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities for preliminary review. And the Zoning Review Committee received some constructive feedback and incorporated the minor revisions that were suggested in the version that you're presented today. Some of the objectives that were addressed by the Zoning Review Committee, including employing an overlay district that would ensure the underlying uses are maintained, using the zoning requirement to support objectives in the housing production plan and master plan, mitigating the potential impacts of potential development and the likelihood that proposals are received at the same time by identifying 3 separate sub-districts with varying sizes and levels of immediate developability. To identify land areas with recent development to occupy the largest sub-district, as I mentioned earlier, which has to be 50% of the total district area and contiguous, in order to postpone the development proposals as far into the future as possible. The committee also wanted to include a sub-district that would offer actual short-term multifamily development opportunities with a reasonable number of units in an area that would benefit the retail and hospitality corridor as much as possible. They also were looking and seeking to include a sub-district that would limit the short-term potential of proposals, but serve as a hedge against the possibility that the industrial development that is already permitted behind Olive Garden and Nature's Remedy happens to not come to fruition. And lastly, to include an effective as-of date that would comply with the legislation's December 31st, 2024 deadline. The last slide helps depict what areas in town this overlay district would apply to. The district that's on the left in that square, and as you can see in your guidebook, is the section that the previous speaker had mentioned, where some folks call it the former pumpkin patch. It's where we have some very recent development, where 40B developments have taken place, where Tyngsborough Commons is located, and Tyngsborough Crossing and Merrimack Commons are located. That area is 27.4 acres. It has recent existing development throughout it, and it satisfies the 50% contiguous area requirement with a 411 unit capacity. The Zoning Review Committee is not anticipating any immediate developability here. There's no short-term or long-term proposals expected. The area in the center, in the blue, represents the industrial portion of the land area that is sitting behind Nature's Remedy and Olive Garden. It happens to be 15.1 acres. It's, as I mentioned, existing exclusively in the I-1 district, where current industrial development is already permitted. It has a 227 unit capacity. The Zoning Review Committee is not expecting any short-term proposals to be expected, and it offers options if the industrial development happens to not come to fruition. The Pheasant Lane Mall parking lot area in the red on the right-hand square is 12.3 acres. I'll point out it's the smallest sub-district of the 3. It has multiple owners and it has good accessibility. It has a 183 unit capacity, and short-term proposals are possible, but they're in an area that would support the retail district corridor itself. I'm happy to answer any additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion or questions on Article 25?
Hi, John Murphy again, 61 Ting Road. Regardless of how well-intentioned one believes the motivation for the MBTA Communities Act is, it's a complete overreach by our Attorney General by declaring it mandatory. It was passed under the previous administration as optional, but with the possibility of not being eligible for some specific and related grants. Flooding our small community with multifamily zones containing 750 units and 50 acres will forever change the character of our town. As other people have said before, that's 15 units per acre, where we used to require an acre and a half for a single-family house. It'll also saturate our already taxed public services with $0 relief from the state. We've already gone through what the as of right means. That means they can do it. They still have to follow the planning board and other things, but they don't need special permits or variances or amendments to build these projects. But it's written in the act that not having the infrastructure to support the multifamily projects is not a valid reason to deny a permit for a multifamily project, which means if you have overflooded schools and you don't have room, that's the town's problem, it's not the state's problem, you have to approve it. Same thing with the sewer, the water, the police, the ambulances, the fire. We're still responsible for putting that in place for these developments, and you can't deny the permit for that reason. There are already multi-towns that have opted out of this. There are some lawsuits that are pending in the court system right now dealing with this, and there's other towns that are rebelling. We should say no to the MBT Communities Act. At a minimum, we should say no and wait until the current lawsuits play out in court. And just to speak to another option, we have right now the option just to send a message to our Attorney General and to our Governor that we're not going to put up with this and we don't agree with their heavy-handed tactics. And we have an opportunity to just send that message to them now. And then if we choose to, we can comply at the fall special town meeting and still meet our deadlines, so we're not putting any of our monies at risk, because we wouldn't be out of compliance yet until the end of this year. So I'd suggest that we say no right now, and we send a message to the Governor and the Attorney General and let them know that we don't like this. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, as someone who is on the Zoning Review Committee, and I've spent the last 2.5 years going through this, I certainly appreciate the comments. I think that there are some things that are not quite correct, and we'll have, legal and Eric provide some details, but I do think it's important that everybody understand the way we wrote this, it does not take place until December 31st. If the lawsuits come, in the unlikely event that the state loses, and I will say that because this is precedented. Chapter 40B, which deals with affordable housing, is in this same section. I think it's important that people understand we probably would not have done this on our own. We probably would have not come up with this zoning bylaw on our own. But there is a need in the state. And, I think that our approach has been to minimize the negative impact, to help accentuate the positive commercial impact, spread things out. I think that the reality is there is a huge negative impact to us on grants. We talked about the $7 million that we've received. There's $2 million that we've already received, which could be in jeopardy. That's not a risk that I think is good for the town to take, to make a statement. I don't think, it wasn't mentioned, but one of the towns, and there's not that many that are fighting this, the town of Milton is fighting it. And Milton has in their budget $250,000+ this year just in legal fees in fighting this one thing. I don't think that's where we want to be. I think that we are thoughtful. I appreciate my colleagues on the planning board, the zoning board of appeals, and the residents at large. They did a lot of work in this, and I think if you see what the planning board, how they voted, and how the other groups voted on this, this is not something where we want to just make a statement. I think making a statement on this one puts us in fiscal jeopardy at a time when we really don't have that opportunity.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Article 25?
Hi, Diane LaRose, 6 Sleepy Hollow Lane. I'm going to say the same. I think we should wait to the general election. We have a small attendance, and I know people did have the opportunity to come. However, as I stated in a previous town meeting, and I was kind of laughed at by somebody, not everyone knows that you vote. And I know it sounds crazy, because we do, but some people do not. They think a town meeting is just to talk about the town. And I've had a couple people tell me that. So I think everybody should know what this is all about, where this is such a huge undertaking. And I do want to let you know, there is more than a few towns fighting this. Littleton, Milton, Marshfield, Wakefield, Hanson, Rowley, Norwell, they've all rejected it. And then Holden, Georgetown, Wilmington, Shrewsbury, they are all deferring to their general election. Rockport has a lawsuit. So why don't we just defer? Why don't we wait until our general election, get more information? This does not have to happen until the end of the year. So that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Mr. Crawford.
I'm just going to say this. We've alluded to, we're just zoning, and that doesn't mean we're building on the property. Well, like I said before, I'd never thought the golf course would become, we'd be building on a golf course either. That was approved at a zoning board meeting during COVID, but it happened. People want to come to Tyngsborough, and if we approve the zoning, everyone should assume they're going to build here, 3-story buildings.
Further discussion?
Hi, Ann Conan, 2 Davis Road. I just have a question about the sewer capacity on Middlesex. I know that we had a lot of discussion about this in past town meetings because we were wanting to have better development along Middlesex Road. But I'm not thinking at the time that when we were talking sewer capacity, we were anticipating this kind of growth on Upper Middlesex Road. So I'm curious how this is going to, if we get development in here, how our sewer capacity is going to work out for that.
I don't know the exact number of our sewer capacity. I know we have members of the sewer commission here. What I would say is that if we were in a situation where the town couldn't supply the sewer, the disincentive, I guess, to the developer is that they would need to create their own pump station or system on their site as well. But I know Brian Martin from the Sewer Commission is here. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Martin, 29 Elm Street, Chairman of the Sewer Commission. Just the capacity issue for the lower half of Middlesex Road, there is no capacity there currently. It's all allocated to people that pay betterments, so going that direction, there's no extra capacity. That doesn't mean we're still working with Chelmsford and Lowell trying to get more capacity there. On the other half of Middlesex Road, there probably would be enough capacity depending on any additional buildings, because that flow goes over the bridge and goes through Chelmsford. So, so the parcel at what is it, Pheasant Lane Mall, there'd probably be capacity there. On the other side of the bridge going back towards Chelmsford, there would be no capacity. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? Article 25, sir?
Hi, quick question. Spencer Riley, 18 Pawtucket Boulevard. Sounds like a lot of people are going to be moving into town. Any priorities given for homeless vets or U.S. citizens only? And I don't know if you can answer that now or not, or something you've, chewed on or in the planning of anything.
Defer to Eric if you want to answer it.
Well, so this has come up, and I guess I can ask council, but I don't believe that we can put any provisions like that on. We asked.
Well, you're not restricting it to vets or something like that. I mean, it's intended to provide reasonable access to families, for sure, by not restricting bedrooms and the like. So you couldn't put a priority on it based on the zoning as written, certainly, and not consistent with the legislation.
So there's no priority for U.S. citizens, you're saying?
No.
Okay.
Good evening. My name's Tommy Foster, Jocks Road.
been here since '99. If this was to go through, okay, with 750 units approximately at the Pheasant Lane Mall, the Board of Selectmen would be pretty happy with that, I would think, because you'd only have to have that voting block to outvote all the people here tonight. Okay, the call would go out, okay, the thing is you'd have 750, even if half of the people of those families showed up, they're all voters, okay, they're gonna control the town. They're gonna control it on one side of the river, the other. That's a heck of a voting block right there, 750 affordable housing. And they're gonna vote their own self-interest. Where are they gonna shop? They're gonna shop in New Hampshire. They're not coming to Massachusetts. They're not shopping in Tyngsborough. They're gonna walk right across the parking lot to the Pheasant Lane Mall. They're gonna walk right up the street to Market Basket, right up the street. They're not coming here. We don't have the market at the bridge anymore, okay? And that'd be a heck of a voting block for any town, okay? And we would lose our voice. We would all lose our voice in this room. We would be irrelevant, okay, if everybody or half of those families in that 750 unit walked in here, sat down, and voted their all self-interest all night long, okay, and we would be screwed. Thank you.
I just want to be clear, this isn't a building mandate, this is just a zoning bylaw which allows this type of housing in those particular areas identified. So it doesn't mean that 750 units are actually going to be installed, right? You need to go through the building permit application process, you need to go through site plan review, and you need the sites to be available to be developed. So just like you can have zoning which allows like a farrier, which is for horseshoes, doesn't mean that a farrier shop is going to open up. It just is allowed in that space. Other things are also allowed as well. And so what I've seen in my communities is people struggle with this for sure, because it's different, but and it's coming down from the state, but it's the risk-benefit analysis that they're wrestling with, the risk that you lose your grant funds and the risk that you have to face litigation, which is costly, and you may have to hire special counsel, et cetera. So that's the things that I'm seeing these towns struggle with and weigh, compared to the risk of 750 units actually being built, which you heard from the experts doesn't seem all that likely. It just puts a layer over those areas which says this type of unit could be built here. Doesn't mean this type of unit will be built here, if that helps the town meeting.
And I think I heard our town planner say that the Pheasant Lane parcel was the smallest of the three. So the 750 units is across all three? Can you clarify that?
I appreciate the opportunity to make that correction. So apologize if it wasn't 100% clear, but out of those three sub-districts, the capacity there does add up to 750. But the first two, which are the largest ones, either already have development on them, so you're not going to be seeing any proposals for development there for many decades to come. The one in the center already has industrial development that's proposed to be and permitted to be constructed there. And it provides the community an opportunity to ensure that that undeveloped land has some zoning flexibility so that those large parcels, if the industrial development doesn't come to fruition, to ensure that those parcels don't remain undeveloped for many more decades to come. And that third sub-district is the smallest one. So the only amount of housing units that would be reasonably anticipated would be a maximum of 183. And even in that particular case, depending on how the developer lays out the site, sure, some people will say they're gonna go right up to that last item, but depending on their vision for development or what landowners they can get to participate in the process, it could be less than 183. Some of the other statements about whether the town would be on the hook or that you can't deny an application for lack of infrastructure, your evaluation of your available infrastructure would take place during the site plan review process. And while the planning board wouldn't be denying a site plan for a lack of available infrastructure from the town. They can apply a specific and relatively reasonable condition that says the developer would have to provide the capacity and or the infrastructure required to support the development that they're proposing if it wasn't already available. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion on Article 25? Yes, sir.
Noah Richard, I'm from 2 Trinity Drive. Just kind of heard a few comments in a couple of the past speakers, and I just, for my part, just moved here to town, like the town, excited to be a part of the town meeting. Really think it's important to note that I don't think bringing in additional people is a bad thing, and I certainly think no voice is lessened by any other, regardless of how you feel that any family coming into the town may lean in one decision or another. I don't think that that's relevant here as this is discussed, and I think it's important to note that everyone's voice does matter in that case, opposed or for, and I don't think we should be making assumptions about how people are coming to this town and want to enjoy this town and be a part of it. So I just wanted to state that for the record.
Thank you. Any further discussion, Article 25?
Mr. Moderator, if I could just,
Yes.
a small comment. So when you're thinking about your vote today, one of the things I want to really put emphasis on is how much money we get in grants every year and what sending a message means. If your vote is for no because you want to send a message and gamble on this, we get about $7 million a year in grants, and we've got $2 million in grants right now that if we don't pass this, we're going to have to pay back. So if you vote no, and we have to get alternative funding for these things in the future that we are going to lose grants for, I want you to understand that that is money that we are not going to get anymore, and that's going to impact taxes. I just want everybody to really understand what a no vote means, because we have done a fantastic job with grants. I think that we have a great administration that puts a lot of time into that. Grants are super, super, super important for us, and I just want everybody to understand how important passing this is for our grant funding.
Mr. Murphy.
Yeah, I just want to rebut that. That's not true. What sending a no message vote today would be is telling the governor we don't agree with her heavy-handed tactics, saying the same thing to the Attorney General. We have a town meeting this fall before we would be out of compliance. So we have the ability to say, no, we don't like this, and if we're forced to do it because things don't change, we have the opportunity to vote it in November when we meet again, and then we'll be in compliance and we don't lose a dollar. So that's the truth.
Okay. Any further discussion, Article 25? I'm seeing no one get up. Okay, all those in favor of Article 25, and this requires a majority vote, all those in favor of Article 25 as printed, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. All right, we're going to go to the hand count. So let's get out our tickets. And my counters again, please. The yeas will go first. Yes. Huh? Yeah, no, I will. All right, all those in favor of Article 25 as printed, signify by holding up your cards. You folks can put your arms down. Okay, all those opposed to Article 25, please hold up your cards. Were 80, and the no votes were 21. That does carry. Last one of the evening, Article 26. To see if the town will vote to amend the town of Tyngsborough zoning map to include the MBTA Communities Multifamily Overlay District or take any other action relative thereto. Do I have a motion on Article 26?
Mr. Moderator, I move the town vote to approve Article 26 as printed in the Finance Committee Guidebook.
Second? Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Motion and a second. Explanation?
Pay attention.
Mr. Moderator, this article is the town's response to the MBTA Communities Act, which requires communities with some level of service or adjacent to service provided by the MBTA to adopt a zoning districts where multifamily housing is permitted by right. Tyngsborough is required to comply by law because it has been classified as an adjacent community. The zoning article creates 3 subdistricts, all of which are located along Middlesex Road. Although this language allows the development of multifamily without a special permit, the planning board retains the site plan review authority. While Article 25 approved the zoning language, Article 26 approves an amendment of the town's zoning map to incorporate the changes outlined in Article 25.
Thank you for that. Any discussion on Article 26? Seeing no one, all those in favor of Article 26 as printed signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That does carry, majority vote. That's it, folks. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Thank you for attending. Have a good evening.